Good morning, everybody. I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar today. While we wait for everyone to join, I'm going to do a quick introduction about myself. I see that the list is still growing quite rapidly, so we are expecting another few people to join. So meanwhile, I'm just going to do a quick introduction about myself. My name is Federico Peña, and I'm the president and founder of IT-ROI Solutions. I've been working in the ITSM space, mainly service management, software configuration management, and project management. So I started off in the software configuration management space. I moved into the service management, service desk and service catalog stuff. And then in the last 10 years or so, maybe a little bit more, the last 12 years, I've been working in the PPM space. I've been working mainly as a consultant. I started off as a consultant, and I strive to make implementations of enterprise tools easier and faster. And today what we're going to do is we're going to try and cover reasons and different ways to display your ITSM data inside of Excel and SharePoint. So try and utilize existing tool sets that your organization already owns to achieve common goals. Now before I get started, I'm going to start by doing a few housekeeping items, while the last seats in the webinar get taken. First of all, we want to encourage all of you to ask questions throughout the webinar. To do this, there is a question box on the control panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. Please type the question as soon as you have them. We'll stop throughout the webinar to answer these questions depending on the section that we're at. Remember, the more you ask, the more you get out of this webinar. Usually we will leave about 20 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer any remaining questions. There is also a handout section, so there is a little panel by the questions box where you can download the PowerPoint of this presentation. Normally, I like to make the demos interactive, so I encourage all of you to write topics of what you would like to see, right? Remember, today's webinar is going to be mainly around displaying your ServiceNow data inside of SharePoint and displaying that data inside of Excel. So I'm going to try and cover different scenarios that some of our clients have used in the past specifically. But, if you can think of something that might be specific use case for in your organization that could really save you some time, feel free to ask about it. Maybe we can cover it during the webinar. Maybe we can show you different ways to be able to accomplish this, So, these are the types of options that I'd like to hear about. Is it possible to do this? Can we mix Excel inside of SharePoint? Those are the things that you sort of want to write inside of the question box. Basically, I want to get started by talking about your business needs. Obviously, I'm going to try and cover different experiences that we've had with other clients, but, mainly what I want to do is make sure that your specific cases get answered. So the webinar topics. First, we're going to start off with why the need for reporting inside of SharePoint and inside of Excel, or the need to be able to display your ServiceNow data in those tool sets, right? So more or less around the importance of decision making around these tool sets. And then we're going to do a quick demo on how to visualize your data inside of SharePoint, how to do it inside of Excel, how to do it, with real time, right? So by utilizing the API. And quite possibly, if we have time, we're going to cover how to interact and manipulate your data inside of those tools, right? To, let's say, enhance your reporting solutions. And then last but not least, we're going to do a quick question and answer session. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover a little bit about us. Our company is called IT-ROI Solutions. We're an upstart enterprise integration consulting firm. We started off in 2009, and our mission was initially to deliver consulting services around the ITSM PPM space. But as the years went, our focus really changed from providing services to figuring out how we could minimize services for organizations. And we did this by trying to automate different portions of the implementation process. We noticed that one of the biggest costs that organizations were encountering were the cost of integrations. So we started our software organization by building what we call the IB, which is the integration bridge. And really this integration bridge is the focus or let's say the engine for most of our other tool sets. So our Excel tools and our SharePoint tools utilize this engine to extract data, right? So this was a tool that was designed to automate the building of integrations, basically by automating the business rules of an ETL. And of course, you have end users. We got complaints from the end users that they wanted a solution that allowed them to manage their own data. So we noticed that the IB was a little bit too technical, and we needed to provide a solution that allowed end users to have their own mini integrations. And this is really where the Excel and the SharePoint integrations were born. All right, so reporting. We focused our organization around making it easier to work with enterprise tool sets by taking advantage of the Microsoft platform, right? As I talked about before, our integration platforms generally are around Excel or SharePoint. Now, we use Microsoft because of the familiarity that people have around using Office tool sets. But the question always comes up when we do demos of our tools, which is, can we report our data in Excel, or can we report our data in SharePoint? Right? We were always concerned with providing the ability for end users to effectively maintain their data, right? But what we really did was we forgot about the management and the C-level executives that needed to view the data or make decisions based on the data that gets updated, right? And most CEOs don't necessarily rely on their data or on their organization's data, right? And to a certain extent, some do. Most surveys show that they're confident that the data is not 100% accurate. So let me ask you guys, how many of you massage your reports before presenting them to your management? Or how many export reports to a PowerPoint because you don't trust the data in your system? Or better yet, you export it to a PowerPoint, massage it, or some people like to call doctor it. So it sounds better when you're at that management meeting. Usually this is done because C-level executives don't have access to the enterprise tool sets. Or maybe they do have access, but they don't have let's say the training necessary, or because they're not in there all the time. They don't have the time to take all of these reports and conglomerate them into one holistic view. So this means that organizations are not making accurate decisions because the data that they have is not accurate. Right? Poor data reporting leads to incorrect information in the hands of decision makers. And the reason for this is that you have two types of decision makers, or really two sides of the spectrum in the decision making. Those that blindly trust their data within their organization, and those are few and far between. And those that don't fail to scrutinize it to a point where there's no trust in the source, right? This makes the job of properly interpreting statistics very difficult, especially if the source is not necessarily the system of truth, but some doctored report generated by one of their subordinates. This causes the majority of decisions to be made by executives based on, on gut feelings and experience instead of true data analytics. Of course, that's not the case with all organizations, but I'm sure, in your particular organization, you can think of at least one thing that could be improved when it comes to data accuracy and reporting. So, this is where people start talking about tool sets, right? And people say, well, let's use Tableau, let's use Jaspersoft, Microsoft BI, let's use Business Objects, right? Or all sorts of other reporting tools, right? But really, making decisions is resolved by process, not by the tool, right? There's always a misconception on how things are presented. But, it's like when people say, ServiceNow helps you manage your incidents. Well, that's not technically true, right? Service managers and analysts help you manage your incidents. ServiceNow is just a tool used by these managers to provide a view into that data, right? So the same applies to enterprise reporting tools. Although this issue of building static reports is becoming a thing of the past, because historically the main issue around reporting is the cost, right? You have to pay some developers a bunch of money to create reports that then have to be exported to some Office tool set so they can be doctored, right? So part of the demo that I'm going to be doing today is going to be around how you can use something like Excel to give you the information that you need to be able to execute your job more accurately, right? So what are we going to be doing? Just utilizing the API layer, extract data via the API layer, display it in Excel, right? But, show you different methodologies or different tips and tricks where you can use out-of-the-box functionality in Excel to get the views that you actually need. I love this screen because, I think of the frustration this guy is having, similar to, generally different reporting tools can offer, different levels of frustration, right? Because of the complexity of the data model, right? And you're probably going to feel like this guy is with the fishing rod. Although very eager and enthusiastic about getting home with some type of catch, the probability of actually getting what he's expecting is pretty unlikely, right? This is the most common problem around business reporting in today's age. Basically, that reporting is just another tool that someone on your team has to learn and master to get something that needs to be, let's say, massaged or doctored, right, for an accurate decision to be able to be made, right? And that's really where the four big V's, the enemies of managing your data, right? Volume, right, is, the scale of the data. One thing is to analyze 1 record, 10 records, 50 records, 100 records. Another thing is when you say 1 million, 10 million, 100 million records, right? Or the variety, right? The different forms of data, right? Because your data comes in different objects. And although the data model links them together, right? Reporting-wise, it isn't necessarily all that easy to do, right? And the speed in which, velocity, the speed in which your data is streaming, right? So, it's, one thing is to report on data assets, for example, that's fairly static, and another one is to report on like Twitter data that changes, 100 million times, per day, right? And the veracity, right? The uncertainty of that data, right? How do you ensure that your data is accurate? So things that we want to think about, right, is, how many decisions, do you think do you make for your organization without the right information, right? And what are the consequences of those decisions? And what kind of reports do you need, right, to not have those problems? Or do you need to get to the right people at the right time? So I want to spend a couple of minutes discussing obvious solutions that are not thought out as enterprise reporting solutions. Probably the main reason that SharePoint and Excel are not thought of as enterprise reporting solution is for a couple of reasons. One is they weren't really designed for that, right? They're not designed for an enterprise reporting solution. And a lot of people think of these tools more as a data tracking, data entry tool, more than a consumption layer, right? And I would generally agree with them, except that there's one key factor that they're not taking into account. This is the flexibility and familiarity that people have with these tools, right? When people think of SharePoint, they think of documents, blogs, collaboration, but rarely do they think of exposing third-party data inside of SharePoint. Right? Of course, there's organizations with elaborate SharePoint implementations where they use BCS or business connectivity services to bring data from different sources into SharePoint. But generally that requires a skill set that's not always common in most organizations. So part of today's demo, I'm going to show you some examples of how to easily map your ServiceNow data to SharePoint. Now the reason that I show this screen is that whatever I show you today for ServiceNow can be done with a lot of other different tools like SAP, Jira, SAP, CAPPM, Workday, and so on, right? One of the key pieces of this is that the approach of bringing data from different tool sets into one screen eliminates a large need to integrate data, right? So I'm gonna spend a couple of seconds providing a couple of common examples that people use this for. A lot of organizations have, for example, SAP and ServiceNow, and they integrate project financials or PO data from SAP to ServiceNow. But really, that's just so they can visualize the data in one spot, right? I'm going to give you actually a reporting success case that we recently did for a government agency in Canada, right? the pain point that they had is they needed to standardize the reporting and needed to be able to share that with audiences who don't have access to their internal service management systems. Right? So the scenario, right? In an effort to improve their commitment and compliance with transparency, they needed to keep structured and standardized records of all their project documentation and keep strict access control, right? So they're required to share this information, right? And there's no better way than within inside of SharePoint, right? Why SharePoint? Because SharePoint had an enterprise rollout where everyone within inside of the organization had access, and you can control the access to specific data within inside of one enterprise tool set. The other solution I wanted to discuss today was to be able to display data in Excel. All right. Currently, lots of users do this by going to some little portlet or mini report and then exporting it to Excel, right? Obviously, once they get past the row limitation, and then building a couple of pivots to show that data in the way they need, right? And this is probably a pretty common scenario. The reason this isn't super popular is because it's very time-consuming. There's multiple steps involved in creating a chart like the one I'm showing on this screen. Right? And when I get into the demo, I'm going to show you and give you ideas on how you can accomplish this very quickly in a repeatable manner. But, there's another thing that I wanted to talk about in Excel, or what a lot of clients utilize our tool sets for in Excel, is when you think of Excel reporting, don't think on reporting on just the contents of your data, right? We have a lot of clients that build reports to report on the data itself, right? So you're probably asking what I mean by this, and let me explain in a specific scenario. The report that you see on the screen is designed to measure the accuracy of your data. Now this has multiple uses, but of course measuring data accuracy programmatically can only be done by measuring the metadata within inside of the system. It'll never tell you if a user's made a mistake, only in the sense that there's inconsistencies, and that it will be able to measure. So inconsistencies, there's a few things, right, such as completeness. Complete. So you might have 50 attributes for an object, but if you're only populating 15, is it necessary, right? Is your data unique? So you're getting repetitive records. The consistency, right? So if data is entered into a specific field, and usually they entered field A, B, C, or D 90% of the time, but there's occasionally a record that says X. Well, that's going to tell you that there's an inconsistency in that specific data. And then the timeliness, right? Is your data stale? When was the last time that was updated, right? If you're doing incident data and the last time your incidents were updated were 2 years ago, it's going to be fairly, let's say, inaccurate or useless data for you to build a report on. So this gives you the ability, right, to utilize Excel to be able to measure data accuracy. So, in this specific sense, right, what we're doing is, we're measuring, the unvalidated data, duplicated data, and incomplete data. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover another use case where we have another organization that utilizes the Excel. It's a telecommunications company. The pain point is, their managed services team lead is in charge of gathering information and creating reports for the company's customers. Currently, they have to perform a physical audit and manually check every record through and export and correct mistakes on an Excel file, which is also manually updated to create the reports daily, right? Now, with the Excel, it gives you the ability of extracting all of the data, filtering all of the data within inside of an Excel sheet, right? And you can just view different types of data sets within inside of the same sheet, and then you're able to generate reports and dashboards in a single view. Basically, the benefit is shortens the time, processing time, live data, right? Because you're extracting via the API. So, and here, I just want people to focus on, how much time do you spend accessing information and documentation, right? So you can make decisions. Do you have the right information, the right attributes, and the right views, right? And is the information real time? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start off by getting into a quick live demo. I'm going to start off with giving a quick live demo of Excel, and then I'm going to head into SharePoint. So I would like for anybody, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to start getting the questions in the question and answer box so we can start covering these inside of the live demo. All right, so with inside of here, I have an Excel interface. This Excel interface basically has a direct connection via the API layer to ServiceNow, right? So we're able to grab data from within inside of ServiceNow and display it inside of Excel. So you notice here we have a little get button, and then the get button at the top I have ServiceNow as the main data source, right? So when I click on the get, right, I have different options of getting data. Now, let's say I wanted to build a report around incidents, okay? But to build my reports around incidents, I also need to get a report around configuration items, right? Because I want to mix a report around the two objects. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come and I say I want to get, and I'm going to get my asset data, right? So I'm going to say, yes, I want to get all of my asset data that's within inside of the system. And what it's doing now is it goes to ServiceNow, does a web service call, and displays that data within inside of Excel, okay? So now I've got my first data set, okay? But now what I want to do is I want to get another data set, but instead of replacing this data that I have within inside of the sheet, I'm going to say I want to get data in a new sheet, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some incident data, okay? So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say I want to get some incident data, and I'm going to do the same thing. I want to get all the data within inside of the system, so I'm not going to filter by anything, and I'm going to click yes. All right, so now it's formatting the incident data and it's going to display it. So what I've done within inside of this Excel sheet, okay, is the first step, like I said, is to be able to build something that extracts the data and displays it in Excel. The second thing is give me the ability to put different objects of ServiceNow into Excel, right? And then the third thing I've done is I've configured a little component that says whenever I run incidents, so the incident interface, right, I want you to dynamically build me a dashboard of that data, mixing the data within inside of incidents and within inside of assets, and put it in another sheet. So within this case, right, I've just built a little macro that basically pivots that data from those two sheets and displays it inside of a sheet. So now I can take this, right, and I can give this to anybody, and they can say, well, they can come here and say, well, I want to actually see, I don't know, the incidents that are new. And by utilizing the filtering within inside of Excel, right, this now gives me an ability to be able to visualize all of my data real time, extremely quick, right? And now, why did we pick Excel to be able to do this? The beauty about Excel is once I extract the data and I contain it within inside of a sheet, then all of my reporting and my dynamic reporting becomes extremely quick, right? I can filter by the data, by any of the time slices or these data slicers, and these data slicers become extremely responsive, right? So I don't have to wait and generate and build new reports based on new filtering criteria because I already have that data set within inside of this Excel, right? So like I said, in this specific case, for this demo, I only had, the little dashboard that was built, right, after I did the incident data extract, right? As you notice, I did an asset data extract first, but what I could have said is, first do an asset data, then do an incident data, and then once you do the incident data, build me the dashboard, right? The same thing applies when we do, for example, data accuracy, right? And I'm going to open up another Excel sheet in a couple of minutes that's going to show you how we do that, right? So we basically extract the data from ServiceNow, display it inside of Excel, right? And then dynamically build a dashboard that measures the accuracy of your data, right? And obviously, this gives you the ability not only to be able to manage your data, right, to view it, but you can also make changes to your data in flight directly from within inside of Excel and literally load it back to ServiceNow. So like I said, This not only gives you the ability to be able to visualize your data but push it back in, but ideally, like I said, all we're doing, is initially we grabbed this data set, okay, from an API call, right? So we do an API call that extracts this data set from ServiceNow and puts it in a sheet, right? And then we grab this data from ServiceNow to put it in another sheet. And then we built a dashboard. Now we did all of these 3 steps manually, and then we wrote a little macro that tied them in together. So like I said, this is much different than having to go through ServiceNow, right? Because if you did this through ServiceNow, you would go through the portlet, you would extract that data, then you'd have to extract it, open up that new sheet, copy it, paste it in here, make sure that the headers stayed the same, do the same thing with the other data, right? And then you pivot that data together, right? You stitch it together to be able to build that one report. So like I said, once you build this logic, right, into the Excel, it becomes very quick and very effective for people to be able to manage their data, right? Visualize it and view it in a very comprehensive form. So I'm gonna stop for a couple of minutes before I get into the SharePoint piece, and I'm going to open the floor for questions. So the first question I have is, it says we use Jira, and would it be Jira feeding data to ServiceNow or the other way around? So yeah, the answer to that is it can be bi-directional. Either way, either Jira can send information to ServiceNow or back and forth. It really depends on the business needs. I've always found people that utilize Jira, it really has multiple different uses, right? Some people say, well, you know what, I want to create my issues within inside of ServiceNow, and those issues create tasks or stories within inside of Jira. And then, you know what, I want to integrate that Jira into, I don't know, Workday for time tracking or whatever it may be, right? So as far as Jira and ServiceNow, it could be absolutely bi-directional, right? So I have a question here that says, how did you get the ServiceNow Excel interface into Excel? This is basically a custom ribbon, all right? And this custom ribbon contains the logic that allows it to communicate to ServiceNow. So think of this specific custom ribbon, a piece of custom code that allows you to extract data and visualize it in different sheets. Is the ServiceNow Excel interface included with ServiceNow licensing? All right, so ServiceNow provides the ability for you to export data into Excel, but this specific tool set that allows you to extract data and to be able to manipulate data, push it back in, and add these additional reporting components is a tool that is a product that we built. And we can definitely help you with, helping you, assist you with implementation questions or anything that you may have. If you like, I can reach out to you directly, but it is not included with your ServiceNow licensing. Now, the other question I have is, it says, is that done with Excel coding, and can you post the results out to ServiceNow dashboard? All right, well, I probably wouldn't want to use Excel to post the results to the ServiceNow dashboard. What I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes, I'm going to show you how we do this inside of SharePoint, and I would utilize SharePoint as my consumption layer. So think of Excel something where you want to see reports and you want to share reports with a couple of people, right? That's where Excel is handy, because you share a specific file, you share it across with a couple of people. Whenever you want to share it with a large audience, I would recommend you use some type of platform. Obviously you can do it with inside of ServiceNow, but what I'm going to be showing today is how you could do that type of sharing directly with inside of SharePoint. So utilize SharePoint as your consumption layer. How do you keep data fresh or near real time? Well, this is only as fresh as your last pull. So, if you wanted to refresh the data, literally you would just come here and you'd say, I wanted to do assets, right? I would just get that asset interface again, and it would repopulate this asset sheet. So yes, the data is as stale as your last poll. The next question is, does the dashboard you demoed come with the Excel interface? Absolutely, we can provide this specific dashboard, no problem, with the Excel interface. Like I said, we have probably, I'm going to say 50 different examples that we've built for different clients on different interfaces. So, and and a lot of clients build their own, or they might have their own needs or their own dashboards already, or their own, let's say, KPI measurements that they might use. And it's absolutely possible for us to incorporate those into this data, right? The next question is, how do we build this Excel interface? So this specific Excel interface is something that we initially built for a couple of PPM products. Specifically, we started off with CA PPM. So this has quite a few years of development involved. Obviously, if you wanted to build it from scratch, it's basically you want to do something with inside of Excel that extracts the API from ServiceNow, right? So you have to configure it to be, if you want it to act like this, you have to configure it to be relatively flexible to read the objects within inside of ServiceNow and display that data. Next question, can this be used with ServiceNow change management? Absolutely, absolutely. Sky's the limit. Any object within inside of ServiceNow is possible to do from the Excel. I would say that the most common use cases for the Excel, let's say, so there's two pieces. One piece is the reporting piece. The next piece, the other piece, is around updating, right? As far as updating, the most common use case is definitely around asset management, because you might have CMDB or you might have Discovery, that actually bring in objects into your asset management, but they don't really provide an easy way for you to manage those assets. So adding assets to your ServiceNow is easy. Removing them is usually the hard part, right? Deactivating them, just because of the volume that you have. I think those are the initial questions that I have. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna continue and I'm gonna get into the SharePoint piece, and then we'll do another quick session of question and answers. So I'm actually going to open my ServiceNow page as well, so we can actually do. So I have lots of different views that we've provided into SharePoint. A couple of common examples, right, of what people want is, like I said, incidents is probably the most popular dashboard that people have, right? So how are we actually building these? The way we build these is we are doing little web parts, and these web parts do web service calls to display ServiceNow dynamically within inside of SharePoint. So I'm gonna cover a little bit of how we build these web parts shortly, right? But I would say that most of the common scenarios that people have is dashboard views for specific people, right? This is a very common view that people have, which they call my stuff, right? So for example, in this case, you can see that I have my stuff, and in my stuff, I have my ServiceNow stuff, I have my CAPPM, my SAP, my Salesforce, and so on, right? So it's just different data sets that I can now display within inside of SharePoint. And from within inside of here, I can drill down into my SharePoint infrastructure. Let's say, for example, I don't know, I have what's a good example here? I might have an asset that I want to bring, right? So within inside of this asset, I can now drill down into this. I'm just going to give it while I wait for this. I'm just going to display. Oh, here we go. So what it does is it'll dynamically build a site passing the parameters of that particular asset and be able to push that data and feed it inside of SharePoint, right? So it allows you to visualize any data real time directly from within inside of ServiceNow. So sky's the limit, and it's not only data that's related to that object, right? It also allows you to do your document management and manage and view your documentation from within inside of ServiceNow inside of SharePoint. So this is a common scenario. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come and open this up in Internet Explorer. And the reason I'm going to use Explorer is because I'm going to show you how we can actually edit and create these pages dynamically from ServiceNow. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to edit this page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a web part inside of here that brings specific data from within inside of ServiceNow. So what I've said is I want to insert, I'm going to insert a web part. I'm going to select our custom web part, and I'm going to say I want to add a portlet component to it. So what this does is this now creates a container for me to be able to display data specific to ServiceNow within inside of this screen. And here what I'm going to say is I want to say edit this web part. So what this does, once I click on edit this web part, it actually connects dynamically to ServiceNow and says, get me all of the available data feeds within inside of that environment. So now I can say, well, I want to bring out an incident, right? And then I can edit the columns. I can display the data any way I like. I could say, I can make this, I can turn this into a pie, a bar, a graph, a chart, anything that I like directly from within inside of SharePoint, right? So now, I can see I have a question up here that says, what's the benefit of using SharePoint versus using dashboarding within inside of ServiceNow? I would say that the main use case for SharePoint is the familiarity that people are with SharePoint, right? If you have a SharePoint rollout directly inside of your organization, it's very easy for you to train your staff to be able to use SharePoint, right? Navigating to SharePoint becomes easy, right? You don't have to force them to go through your ServiceNow platform to be able to visualize their data. Now they can do it directly from within inside of SharePoint. Similar use case to why you would want to do it within inside of Excel. So, all right, we have, 15 minutes left within inside of here. I'm going to open up the floor for questions and answers. All right, so I see a couple of questions coming up here. Does this work with SharePoint on the cloud? Yes, absolutely. So that's another common scenario. Since most clients are now moving to Office 365, it is a common scenario for people to want to use this on the 365 platform. So yes, absolutely supports the cloud. What are the versions of Excel and SharePoint does this work on? This basically works on any supported versions by Microsoft. So as long as Microsoft is supporting it, we are supporting it as well, which means basically 2013 and greater. What are the API limitations? Well, obviously you have the API limitations of ServiceNow, but for example, we've overcome the ones, for example, the row limitation and so on. What we do is we do a paging to make sure that it keeps bringing other records until your whole record set's been complete. Do I need extra ServiceNow licenses for these tools? Or how does this work? As a matter of fact, you would need less in a way, right? Because there are people that no longer need to go through ServiceNow. They could just go directly in through SharePoint, for example, to visualize some data. So you don't need more, you need less. Well, if nobody else has any additional questions, I'm going to return the last 15 minutes of your day to you guys. I want to thank everyone for attending. And, I want to let everyone know that I'm going to send a link for the replay of the video within the next 24 hours, and specifically for those people that weren't able to attend. And I want to thank everyone once again. Bye.